All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Classic Comics live stream, another Trek Talk, a New Year's Eve Trek Talk. Okay, so this week our episode is going to be The City on the Edge of Forever. And obviously this is Oh, and first hello, happy new year to you, Lord Thoth. Hope thank you for being here. All right. So, and of course, The City on the Edge of Forever, one of the more famous episodes of Star Trek. It's an award winning episode. That's one reason. Another reason is also because some of the controversy around it, which I'll get to later. Now, let's start with a description of the episode. Well, if I can find it. Here we go. Okay, so this is from April 1st, 1967. Under the influence of drugs, Dr. McCoy plunges through a time portal and into the New York City of the 1930s. Kirk and Spock follow him, fearing that the drugged medical officer might commit an act that will alter the course of history. While trying to find McCoy, Kirk falls in love with Edith Keeler, a charity worker helping victims of the Depression. Kirk doesn't know exactly what McCoy is about to do, but he has learned that the doctor's actions could prove fatal to Edith. Okay, and this episode is written by Harlan Ellison, more or less, with Gene Coon, Gene Roddenberry, and DC Fontana, and Stephen Karabatsas all contributing to it. And the episode is directed by Joseph Pevney. And as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for the behind the scenes information. This is more than Star Trek at its best. It is television at its best. One of the central challenges of producing meaningful drama in a continuing series is that the lead characters must persevere. Whatever life and death situations the writers dream up, the audience has the foreknowledge that the series leads will be back next week unruffled. The future of the show depends on it. For a writer or group of writers to come up with a story that challenges the recurring characters of a series and forces them to change or grow in some way without derailing the series is rare. And that is the best way to describe The City on the Edge of Forever. Profoundly rare. Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, Love Story, Somewhere in Time, and The City on the Edge of Forever. These are among the greatest love stories ever depicted on the screen. Harlan Ellison was one of the first writers that Gene Roddenberry hired for Star Trek. Robert Justman said, Gene was looking to find well respected and highly talented science fiction writers. One of the most prestigious names on his list was Harlan Ellison. Ellison was 32, and 1 year before this had won the Writers Guild Award for Demon with a Glass Hand, a 1964 episode of The Outer Limits. He also wrote scripts for Route 66, Burke's Law, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Another one of his pre-Star Trek jobs, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, resulted in Ellison using the pseudonym Cordwainer Bird for his screen credit. He explained, quote, when I was just starting out, there was a science fiction writer named Cordwainer Smith. His real name was Paul Lindbarger. He worked for the CIA, as did his wife, and he couldn't write fiction under his own name. So he invented the name Cordwainer Smith, and he became a real icon in his film. He was a writer above the range of most writers. So when it came my turn to come up with a pseudonym, I wanted to pay homage to Cordwainer Smith, but I also wanted to give the bird to the person who had rewritten me. Here's the finger in your face, so to speak. So it's sort of a love-hate pseudonym. I've used it with some regularity. I used it on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and I used it on The Flying Nun. I had no idea he had written an episode of The Flying Nun. Lord Thaw says 9.5 out of 10, closest get to 10 out of 10 at all. There are two other episodes that are that close. Yeah, this is one of the best, no doubt about it. Lord Thoth, also Mirror Mirror and Doomsday Machine. Okay. Recalling his inspiration for The City on the Edge of Forever, Ellison said, quote, I had been reading a biography of the great evangelist Amy Semple McPherson, and I began toying with the idea of what would happen if Kirk fell in love with a woman like that. Would it be interesting if they went back in time and the woman who is so pure and good and decent, who Kirk is desperately in love with, has to die in order for time to be put right? And if he was truly in love with her, how heart wrenching would that be? Ellison pitched his idea to Roddenberry in March of 1966. Contrary to recollections of some, the treatment for the story arrived quickly in less than a week. Robert Justman said, I can still remember reading it and thinking to myself, this is brilliant. The story was brilliant, but it was also very different than the episode it would inspire. In this early version, it is not McCoy in a drug induced state of madness who flees to the dead world where the time vortex serves as a passageway to the past, but a depraved member of the crew named Beckwith, who is a drug dealer and a murderer. The story, in fact, begins with Beckwith supplying a powerful narcotic called the Jewels of Sound to a fellow crew member named Lebec. The latter, who is an addict, wears a look of orgasmic pleasure after swallowing the pill and experiencing the incredible music of the jewels, sounds from another time, another space. Um, Not Leonard Nimoy's album, I assume. Ellison said, quote, I was one of the first writers on Star Trek that Roddenberry hired. It was so early in the history of Trek that Roddenberry didn't really know where he was going. The potential for me was wide open, so I was able to go and do what I wanted, and I was able to write the way I always write, which is from my own well of polluted instincts. I figured on a ship that size with that many people thrown together, it would be like any military unit. There would have to be some people who were just lawless. After Lebec threatens to go to Kirk and turn Beckwith in, the drug dealer bludgeons the embittered addict to death. But there are witnesses to the crime. A court martial is conducted. Beckwith is found guilty, and Kirk sentences him to be taken to the nearest inhabited planet to be executed by a firing squad. That planet circling a dying sun is the dead world of the time vortex. Kirk and Spock, with a firing squad of 12, beam down with Beckwith, all wearing insulation suits and breather packs. Before they can carry out their task, their instruments register radiation coming from over the horizon. With Beckwith in tow, they follow the reading and soon find themselves on a mountaintop near a great city, which appears to be uninhabited. It is here they encounter a group of men, but such men as explorers from Earth have never known. Ellison describes them as being 9 feet tall and old as the chill and dying sun that casts only shadows on this empty planet. These are the guardians of forever. They have been here, they say, quote, since before your sun burned hot in space, before your race came into being. They stand guard over the time machine created by the ancients. Kirk is intrigued and asks to see an example of the history of the gateway that the gateway can reveal. And I have to say, remember that Beckwood has been brought down here to be executed. So he's basically just waiting to be killed. And then they're like, oh, let's go to the city and check that out. Oh, let's see this time machine. What can it do? And I don't know. If I'm Beckwood, I'm like, look, if you're going to do it, just do it. Uh, Kirk picks Earth as the subject and is shown scenes from his own world's past up until the time of the Great Depression. At this point, Beckwith leaps through the vortex. In a blink, all has changed. Kirk is informed by the Guardians that history has been altered. He and his landing party immediately beam back to the ship to find out if their lives and the Enterprise have also been changed. They discover the Enterprise is now a renegade vessel, a pirate ship, more or less, manned by a group of cutthroats. Kirk and his men are able to take control of the transporter room and lock the marauders out. He orders his men to stay and hold the transporter room while he and Spock beam back down to the planet. Once there, the Guardians agree to send Kirk and Spock back to the time period to which Beckwith invaded. The two men are told they will be seeking a young woman, Edith Kestler, which was the name in the early drafts, who was to be run down by a moving van. Beckwith has somehow prevented Kessler from dying. In order to write time, they must stop him from doing this. Therefore, in Ellison's story, Kirk falls in love with a woman he already knows is going to die. He does this in a very short time span since we do not meet Edith until just past the halfway point of the episode. Also, it is not Kirk who makes the great personal sacrifice of allowing Edith to die. The captain cannot bring himself to stop Beckwith from saving her. Spock is the one who does it. A heartbroken Kirk returns from the past with Spock and Beckwith. The latter is punished by the Guardians and sent back into the vortex to materialize in the heart of a sun and to experience his own death over and over throughout eternity. Later on the Enterprise, the saddened Kirk receives a visit from Spock, who tells his captain, quote, "No woman was ever loved as much, Jim, because no woman was ever offered the universe for love." Even with such profound differences between the story and the one filmed, This City on the Edge of Forever was a startling and highly dramatic tale, but it was also clearly the blueprint of an expensive production. And there were things that were happening within the story, things Kirk was doing that didn't fit the mold Roddenberry wanted for his story. Um, Ellison was asked to revise his storyline for free. The working of the revised outline seemed to take a long time, Dorothy Fontana recalled. Other stories came in, then scripts. Weeks went by, but no Ellison. It took 5 weeks, in fact, for Ellison to deliver his revised outline, and then another 2 to revise it again. The latter dated May 13th. Of this, Fontana said, "It was delivered with glad cries of enthusiasm from Gene Roddenberry, Desilu, and NBC." The court martial was out. Instead, after killing Lebec, Beckwith beams himself down to the planet. Kirk and Spock with Yeoman Rand and a security detail follow. At Roddenberry's request to save money, Ellison removed any reference to environmental suits and breather packs. Another substantial change deals with the information given to Kirk and Spock by the Guardians. The giant aged aliens do not name Edith in this version. They do not talk about specifics. Instead, they speak in generalities and parables. In this version, Spock spots Edith in the beginning of Act 3, where she leads a street corner revival. She speaks to the crowd of disgruntled derelicts about the brotherhood of man, about the need to trust and the need to love. From here, the story progresses in much the same way as the previous drafts. It was now late May, and the first episode to film, the Corbomite maneuver, was going in front of the cameras. And despite the frightful cost projections, Justman recalled how Roddenberry immediately put Ellison on assignment to go to script so that no more time would be lost. Roddenberry had done this before with Theodore Sturgeon on Shore Leave and Robert Bloch on What Are Little Girls Made Of. The Writers Guild at this time allowed a freelance writer 2 weeks to deliver uh, a first draft teleplay. Producers also always pushed to get the script sooner. Ellison took 3 weeks to deliver, not as long as some remembered, but nonetheless, it was late. Justman recalled, "We're in full production and rapidly running out of scripts, and we still hadn't seen anything from Ellison. Because I'd worked with him before on The Outer Limits, I knew that he was a real procrastinator when it came to actually writing his scripts. He had trouble getting started because, let's face it, writing is a difficult process." Mary Black said, "Harlan wasn't just a procrastinator, he was somebody who always had something else to do. Harlan always had 40 things going," said John Black. "He was doing a book and he had this short story he had to get in or whatever. At one point, Harlan supposed to deliver, and he was ill or he was this or that. The story just wasn't getting finished." Fontana remembered, "Harlan was going through an emotionally intense and difficult period, the breakup of one of the shortest marriages on record. On the other hand, we needed a script. Desperate measures were called for." Roddenberry set aside a desk in the assistant director's room and asked Harlan to come in and work on the script in the studio every day. John D.F. Black said, "Oh, Harlan, I like him even when we were going through all of that. He always wanted to be on the set. First, he wanted an office on the lot, so we got him one. A little bitty office at the end of the hall, and he had it all to himself. Then he installed his portable record player so he could listen to his jazz records as he was writing, or supposedly writing." Ellison said, quote, "They had me in my little office in the wardrobe room on the first floor of the old building. It was like a closet. So I'd go to the set all the time, and I got to be good close friends with Leonard Nimoy and Grace Lee Whitney." Black remembered Harlan would be in there with his rock and roll playing very loud, with the casting people trying to have readings and saying, "Turn it down, Harlan." I couldn't hear people in my office on the telephone, and I tell him to keep it down. At one point, I guess the second or third day he was there, I walked down the hall because the Rolling Stones were playing really loud. I knocked on the door and there wasn't an answer. I opened the door and he wasn't even in there. Black found Ellison on the set having his picture taken. It was snapped during the filming of Mud's Women, with Ellison sandwiched between a grinning Kirk and Spock. Black recalled, "I said, 'Harlan, you're supposed to be writing. What are you doing here?' And he said, 'Well, I came over for lunch with the company.' And I said, 'Harlan, it's 3:30. The company had lunch at 2. Well, I wanted to see what they were doing,' he said. And I said, 'Harlan, please go back to the office and work on your story.' So Harlan walked back with me, went into his office, and the record goes on again. When I went down to see how he was doing, the record was playing and Harlan wasn't there. He had snuck out the window. Bobby Justman was of the mind that we should just nail the door and windows shut." Again, in Harlan Ellison's defense, the total time period, which all remembered as being both long and tortured, was in fact only 3 weeks. Fontana said, Harlan did spend some time visiting the set, but that's considered necessary research for a writer. When a show hasn't been on the air yet, freelance writers must have an opportunity to study the actor's speech patterns and delivery, the little gestures and nuances each one brings to his or her role, and most of all, the character relationships which are being built episode by episode. Mary Black added, "Okay, fair enough. So he was researching, but he really liked just to be in the middle of it, which is why he would always be on the set. When we had our long evenings catching up, writing stuff, Harlan would show up. Sometime he'd show up before Bob Justman left, and he would bump heads with Bob about whatever. Other times we'd go in there after Bob had left for the night. Bob's office had a bathroom and a couch. It was more comfortable than John's office. So the three of us would end up in there, and Harlan would set up surprises for Bob on his recording machine. I remember he opened the door to the John and had the microphone down in the toilet and repeatedly flushed it for Bob to hear when he came in the following morning." That's real mature. Harlan was always playing. He was constantly looking to have a good time. He was also always dodging work. Bob would come in from lunch and find Harlan asleep on the couch in his office. He was a person who didn't have any boundaries. Justman vividly recalled the day he came to work, and instead of flushing sounds on the machine, he found a finished first draft teleplay. It was on June 7th. He remembered thinking, "I've got a script. I'm smiling and I go to my office to give it a quick read. And then I stopped smiling. Harlan's script is a brilliantly written, but completely unusable. At first glance, I can tell it's going to be hugely expensive. And at the same time, his enterprise characters are speaking incorrectly and, more importantly, behaving incorrectly." Case in point, when Kirk and Spock first arrive in New York City, they see penniless men listening to an orator who is inciting them to a riot. The orator howls, "What kind of country is this where men have to stand in bread lines just to fill their bellies? I'll tell you what kind of country run by foreigners, all the scum we let in to take food from our mouths and all the alien filth that pollutes our country." Hearing this, Spock says to Kirk, "Is this the heritage Earthmen brag about?" Later, after Kirk and Spock have to flee an angry mob and take refuge in the basement of a building, Spock calls humans barbarians, saying Earth is as violent as any aboriginal world we ever landed on. My race never had this sort of thing. We went to space in peace. Earthmen came with all of this. Kirk fires back, and that's why you reached space 200 years after us. Spock then counters, try to tell me that Earthmen uplifted my race. Tell me that and use Beckwith as an example of nobility. And then Kirk retorts, I should have left you for the mob. Yeah, a little bit out of character there. The conflict was present, but the voice of Star Trek was not. Ellison revised his script begrudgingly. He later said, you must understand that working in television can be a singularly crippling and brutalizing thing for the creative spirit, particularly if a writer perceives himself as something more than merely a hack or a creative writer who cares about his work and who cares about his work and puts in small touches, special scenes, lines of enriching dialogue that give him his reason for writing. Hold on a moment. Okay. Almost all of those touches were excised in the name of straight action sequences. Their loss diminished the value of the script enormously, at least for me. Ellison was working faster now, taking only a week to submit his next draft, but he was not making all the changes the producers were asking for. A bemused John D.F. Black said Harlan didn't know anything about the production side. He knew half of what I knew, and I didn't know anything. On August 15th, after 2 months of what Justman remembered as much telephonic prodding, Ellison turned in a second revised draft, dated August 12th. Ellison typed revised final draft on the cover page. Roddenberry later said, I think Harlan's a genius, but he's not exactly the most disciplined writer in the world. He had Scotty dealing in interplanetary drugs and things like that. Ellison, still burning in the mid 1990s over this statement, fumed, quote, I got you Scotty right here, Gene. Anybody who ever read that script knows there's no Scotty selling drugs or any of the other horse pucky that he's been spreading for more than 25 years. Roddenberry complained. Also, he wrote so that it would have cost 200,000 more than I had to spend. He wrote two huge crowd scenes and all sorts of things. I tried to get him to change it, and he just wouldn't. Justman on the side of management said, Gene tried to reason with Harlan, so did I, but we both struck out. According to William Shatner, he was sent to Harlan Ellison's home on Roddenberry's behalf to see if the famed writer was cooperating in making the changes that had been requested. I failed miserably, said Shatner. I can remember getting inside the house and being yelled at throughout my visit. Harlan was very irate, and within a rather short period of time, he threw me off his property. Insane with anger at Justman, Roddenberry, and Kuhn, I was just the messenger, but he was out to kill me too. Ellison said it all boiled down to Shatner not liking that Leonard had more lines than he did. He would count lines of dialogue literally. He sat on the sofa in my living room and did that. He would always give you some hyperbolic rationalization why Leonard should not have 3 lines on a page where he only had one. And it never made any sense. But you got the sense after a short time that either you made the changes or he would go back and rat you out, which is what he did with Roddenberry. He went to Roddenberry and said, well, it's an uneven script and I'm not getting my due, and you'd better get in there and do some rewriting. And Roddenberry chose Shatner over Nimoy always. He didn't even know where the gold laid in that show. At this point, Stephen Karabatzos had replaced John D.F. Black as the story editor. Now it was his job to follow Gene Coon's instructions and fix the script. Dorothy Fontana said the original script was a hell of a script. If it had just been an episode of The Outer Limits, it would have been fine. But it's not the best Star Trek script because it doesn't involve the characters as deeply as they should be involved in an episode. The love story was there, but you didn't get to meet Edith Keeler until the third act. You might have seen her, but she never got to meet Kirk until Act 3, and that's too late. And the person who goes through to distort the timeline was a crewman who was addicted to a narcotic. You'd never seen him before. You've seen him in the teaser and then he's gone. In the Karabatsos version, the drug dealing and drug using crew members were eliminated, and instead, McCoy became the catalyst who brings Kirk and the party to the planet's surface for their encounter with the Guardian of Forever. As seen in the filmed episode, Sulu is injured on the bridge and McCoy is called to treat him. The ship shudders and McCoy falls, hitting his head and being knocked unconscious. In sickbay, he is given an injection of adrenaline and suffers from adrenaline poisoning. This is why he's in a maddened state and beams himself down to the planet. In 1966, Ellison complained, Karabatsos took a chainsaw to my script and screwed it up so badly that Gene Roddenberry asked me to come back and do yet another rewrite for no money, of course. Hold on. Uh, There we go. Ellison's second revised final draft, as he called it, dated December 1st, arrived on December 19th. The script, and there were a lot of rewrites done that I'm not going to go through it all because it would take too long. But suffice it to say, a lot of rewrites were done, but it still wasn't right. The script still needed a major overhaul, but Roddenberry had already suffered the slings and arrows of famed science fiction writers that he had rewritten on Star Trek. He was in no hurry to repeat the experience, so Gene Coon ran the script through his typewriter over the Christmas and New Year holidays, delivering it on January 9th, 1967. Among the changes, he eliminated the subplot that takes place aboard the ship, where, after the timeline has been disturbed, the Enterprise becomes a renegade ship. And then he found a few areas to add humor. Quote, the little touches of humor tend to be Kuhn's lines more than anyone else's, Fontana said. Um, Gene Kuhn's immortal line about Spock getting his head caught in a rice picker, for example. Dorothy Fontana's term came next. She was, after all, the brand new story editor. Quote, I reported to work, and on the first day I walked into a hornet's nest of trouble with the city on the edge of forever at the heart of it, she said. Gene Roddenberry and Gene Kuhn turned to me and said, you're it. You rewrite this. Among the changes, Fontana invented the cordrazine, the drug that puts McCoy into a temporary state of madness. Ellison was not impressed. He preferred his own idea from his rewrite of Karabatsos' rewrite, where the venom of an animal bite causes the madness. Fontana wasn't about to tell Ellison that the cordrazine came from her. Years later, regarding another of her contributions, she said, I tried to build a relationship between Edith and Kirk gently and meaningfully so her death would be the most heart wrenching personal moment Kirk would know. Harlan liked this draft a little better, but not much. He thought Gene Kuhn wrote it, and I kept my mouth shut. uh, Justman warned that the script, now Fontana's rewrite of Kuhn's rewrite of Karabatsos' rewrite of Ellison's rewrite, would still take at least 7 days and very probably 8 days to film. The work continued, Justman said. Quote, after several all-night sessions, Gene churned out his own revised final draft teleplay. His version is the one we began filming on the morning of February 3rd. Roddenberry's draft, with revised pages on February 2nd and 3rd, retained much of the writing from Kuhn and Fontana. Ellison was livid. 30 years later, he complained that there are chunks of dialogue, like the speech Edith gives about how in the future everything will be wonderful because we'll have spaceships to feed the hungry people, which is precisely the kind of dopey utopian bullshit that Roddenberry loves. So I knew Gene had screwed around with the script. But he also knew he hadn't done the massive restructuring that was done to my story, although that expert liar has told people from lecture platforms for the better part of a quarter of a century that it was he who rescued that brilliant script from the inept hands of the slacker Ellison, when in truth, Roddenberry had about as much writing ability as the lowest industry hack. A fact, do it with, make of it what you will. Hello, Gwagnar. Happy New Year, sir. Thank you for stopping by. Good to see you. On the day filming began, Robert Justman received a letter from Ellison's agent. It read, Mr. Ellison would like his credit on Star Trek, the Star Trek episode City on the Edge of Forever, to read Cordwainer Bird. Ellison explained he threatened to get me blacklisted if I used the pseudonym Cordwainer Bird. I said I'm entitled. I've registered it and I've used the pseudonym before, and I don't want my name on this thing. Regardless, Ellison's real name remained when the screen credits were created during post-production. Justman explained, quote, after a lot of fussing and hemming and hawing, and finally, according to Harlan, an absolute threat from Roddenberry to keep him from ever working in Hollywood again, Cordwainer Bird was convinced to revert to being Harlan Ellison again, and his screen credit reflected that. Roddenberry did not take a screen credit for his contributions to the writing, as was the case with the Corbomite Maneuver, The Enemy Within, What Are Little Girls Made Of, and Shore Leave. There's little doubt he would have liked credit. What writer wouldn't? But in his mind, the prestige these renowned science fiction authors brought to Star Trek was more important than the accolades he might receive as a script doctor, or even the bonus money and residuals that went along with the credit. Jerry Soule, Richard Matheson, Robert Bloch, Theodore Sturgeon, and Harlan Ellison gave Star Trek that instant prestige. Gene Coon also took no writing credit. He had already added his name to the scripts for Space Seed and A Taste of Armageddon, thereby taking half the credit and half the residuals, but not here despite City being nearly a complete rewrite in regards to dialogue. Coon knew how important Harlan Ellison's name on Star Trek was to Roddenberry. Roddenberry, in fact, believed he had an understanding with Ellison that neither of them nor any others on the Star Trek staff would talk about the writing process of The City on the Edge of Forever to the public at large or in the press. And Roddenberry later wrote to Ellison about this, where he felt that the latter had broken his word concerning their understanding. But I'll get to that after I've gone through the episode here, because that's quite a lengthy preamble. Because yeah, wow, it's already half an hour in, and I'm not even to the episode yet. Let me have a drink of water right quick. Okay. All right. So this episode begins with the Enterprise on red alert in orbit around an unexplored planet. The ship is being buffeted by what Spock describes as distortions in time. Sulu is caught in an explosion and injured. Kirk calls for medical assistance, and Bones arrives on the bridge and decides to administer a few drops of cordrazine, a very potent drug, to Sulu. Kirk questions the wisdom of this, but Sulu immediately recovers, and McCoy says, yeah, you had a medical comment to make? It's like, stay in your lane, bro. You know, do I tell you how to command the ship? I mean, yeah, he does. He does all the time, doesn't he? Like every episode, he's telling Kirk what to do, but whatever. Now, another wave of distortion hits the ship, which causes McCoy to fall onto his hypospray, which is full of cordrazine, accidentally injecting himself with it. Almost immediately, McCoy goes berserk and begins ranting and calling the crew killers and murderers, warning them that they won't get him. Kirk and Spock try to restrain McCoy, but he escapes and flees from the bridge. Hey, Adega. Good to see you, sir. Happy New Year. He says, yes, I have the autographed novelization of this book. Shatner and Nimoy also signed it. So, um, yeah, cool. I mean, so you say Nimoy and Shatner also signed it. Who was the other person? Was it Ellison or was it someone else? Okay. So then McCoy escapes from the bridge, and why they don't go after him, I don't really know. But they call a red alert and have security on the lookout for him. Now McCoy goes to the transporter room. He enters while the transporter chief, Mr. Kyle, isn't looking. Oh, do you mean Mark Cushman? Is that who you mean? And you got to wonder, why doesn't Kyle hear the door open? Those doors, when they open, they make a noise, and yet he conveniently doesn't hear it. And then McCoy gives him a Hollywood style judo chop and knocks him out. And McCoy never does this again in the history of Star Trek. But he apparently is capable of KOing someone with a karate chop. You wonder why he never does it again. I mean, he he never displays any fighting ability ever again after this, really. Guagnar says, I recommend reading both the original teleplay book that Harlan Ellison wrote, which has the original script and information on it. Okay. Guagnar, on the writing and rewriting process. Okay. So then, after incapacitating Mr. Kyle, he activates the transporter and beams down to the planet. Kirk then is alerted by security that he has taken the transporter and beamed down, and Spock notes that the transporter was focused on the time distortions. So whatever is happening down there, McCoy is right in the midst of it. So Kirk says he orders to have a security team to beam down with him and Spock to try and find McCoy. So he and Spock, Mr. Scott, Uhura for some reason, and a pair of security guards, red shirts, beam down to the planet. And they find a world that is filled with some sort of ancient ruins. Oh, they get by Harlan Ellison? Okay. Well, so it's autographed by Ellison and Nimoy and Shatner. Wow, that's cool. Did you meet him at a convention or something? I mean, I would guess that would be where you would have gotten it signed, right? Guagnar says they also released a comic book adaptation. Yes, I know. In fact, my plan is next week for the next Trek Talk, I'm going to cover that comic. I'll just read through it rather than doing another episode. Oh, it was given to you. Okay. All right. Well, hey, a cool gift to receive. Very nice. Congratulations. Okay, now Kirk orders the security team to fan out and look for McCoy while he and Spock inspect this odd round, well, not round exactly, but this unusual structure. I want to call it an arch, but it's not an arch, so I'm not sure what to call it. At least, well, I mean, I know what to call it specifically, but not like that shape. Kirk asks, what is it? And the structure itself speaks, saying, since before your sun burned hot in space and before your race was born, I have awaited a question. While they speak with the Guardian, the others continue to search for McCoy. Not very well. Uh, so Spock correctly deduces that this object, which refers to itself as the Guardian of Forever, is in fact a time portal, a gateway to other times and places. The Guardian says this is correct, and then shows a series of historic images offering to send them to the past to any time period that they wish to visit. Meanwhile, security finds McCoy, who is still ranting wildly, and Spock manages to subdue him with a nerve pinch. Kirk then suggests using the Guardian of Forever to go into the past and prevent McCoy's accident from happening. However, the past years are being displayed at such a rapid rate that Spock says it's unlikely they could return to just the right day that they wish to visit. Then McCoy awakens and he charges into the portal and disappears into the past. Then Uhura says that her communicator has gone dead and she can't contact the ship. The Guardian tells them that they what they had known no longer exists, and they realize that McCoy has somehow changed history, so that now the Federation and Starfleet no longer exist, leaving them stranded, as Kirk says, totally alone. Now, Spock, who was recording the passing of the years in the portal with his tricorder, says that they can use the tricorder to identify the time period McCoy went back to, and then go back to that time themselves to recover McCoy and prevent him from doing whatever caused the changes in the timeline. When the proper moment comes, they pass through the portal as well. And they arrive in 1930s America during the Great Depression in New York. They quickly realize they're going to need to change their clothes. And so Kirk steals some clothing, but of course, they immediately get caught by a policeman. Spock manages to nerve pinch the cop, and then they flee and hide in the basement of a building where they change out of their uniforms. After changing, Spock informs Kirk that he thinks that they have arrived about a week before McCoy. Of course, Kirk notes they have no idea where they are or where and when McCoy will appear. Spock suggests that there are theories that suggest time is like a stream and that currents in time may have brought them to this period, and that those same currents may bring McCoy to the same place as well. In any case, they have to hope that's true if they want to have any hope of finding him and stopping him from changing history. Spock laments that he could use the Enterprise computer to further examine the historical footage that the Guardian displayed for them, and Kirk suggests building something from existing technology. To which Spock says, in this zinc plated, vacuum tubed culture. And then they meet Edith Keeler, and they learn that they're in the basement of the 21st Street Mission, which is a kind of charity house for the poor and destitute, which there are plenty of during this time. She agrees to let them stay in exchange for cleaning up the basement and paying them a little bit of money, which Spock says he needs to purchase radio tubes and electronics for my hobby. Later, they go upstairs to eat, and they hear Edith give a speech in which she foretells humanity progressing and eventually traveling to the stars and finding solutions to humanity's problems. Kirk and Spock are struck by her foresight, with Kirk in particular seeming to be quite taken with her. Later, Edith commends them for the great job they did cleaning the basement and offers to help them get a room at the boarding house where she lives. Now, sometime later, I need to change this out. Now, sometime later, it's not clear how long, but at least a few days, Spock is working on the mnemonic a mnemonic memory circuit using stone knives and bear skins. He tells Kirk that he needs several pounds of platinum, and Kirk says that they aren't likely to acquire any platinum anytime soon. Spock says that at the rate he's working, he may have something. He may have the circuit operating in a month. Now, later, they see a man working with a set of tools to repair, I think it's a clock. And Spock notes that these tools would be useful. So later that night, he steals them. And I got to say, this is one part where I think they kind of dropped the ball. I mean, I'm no expert on the 1930s, but this combination lock that they're using, it looks very modern. It doesn't look like something from that period. And I'm not sure if they had combination locks that small back then. I know they had combination locks for like bank vaults and maybe for safes, but I don't know if they had little bitty combination like bike locks like that back then. And if they did anyway, I'm pretty sure this isn't from that area. Yeah, it's not. It's not period. Yeah, I didn't think it was. Yeah, it does it does stand out rather glaringly. Okay. Where was I? Okay. Now, later that night, Edith confronts them about the theft of the tools. Spock and Kirk reassure her that they would have been returned, and Edith comments on how out of place they seem to be, as if they don't belong in this place and time. Then she asks Kirk to walk her home. And it's becoming clear that Kirk and Edith are becoming attracted to each other. Meanwhile, Spock has his memory circuit working and begins examining the data on his tricorder, which shows that Keeler was going to be killed in an auto accident of some sort. Then Kirk arrives and Spock shows the data to him, but now the historical record has changed, and now it shows that Keeler met with President Roosevelt and was commended by him for her work with the poor. Then the circuit burns out, and they're unable to see anything further. Then Spock tells Kirk about the obituary he saw for her earlier, and that says that he believes Keeler is the focal point in time that both they and McCoy have been drawn to. The question is, which future is the one they want to preserve? The one where she becomes an important figure, or the one where she dies? As they discuss this, McCoy finally appears, still ranting and raving under the influence of the Cord regime. He confronts a man, demanding to know what planet he's on. Then he passes out, and the man steals his phaser and then accidentally disintegrates himself with it. Well, I hope that guy wasn't important. The next day, he arrives at the mission, and Edith takes him to a room to rest. Later, Spock has the memory circuit working again, and they see that Edith Keeler led a pacifist movement that kept America out of the Second World War. This led to the bad Germans inventing the atom bomb first and winning the war. All of this happens because McCoy prevented her from dying in an automobile accident. Spock asserts that their priority must be to find McCoy and stop him from interfering. But Kirk has a problem with this, as he now admits that he has fallen in love with Edith and doesn't want her to die. But Spock insists that for their future to exist, Edith must die. Hello, RTNZ. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris can simply walk into Mordor. Yes, as he should, as he should. Okay. Let's see. Okay, now McCoy recovers and offers to help around the mission as a show of gratitude for the help that he has received. Edith tells him that they can talk about that later, as he has a date to see a movie with her man. She doesn't mention Kirk by name, but it's Kirk she's talking about, and then she leaves. Now, as she and Kirk head to the movie, she mentions McCoy, and McCoy realizes, or Kirk realizes, McCoy is now at the mission. He heads back, and he and Spock meet McCoy at the front door. They have a brief reunion, uh, and then Edith, who is confused and distracted by all this, walks into the street and into the path of a truck. McCoy tries to help her, but Kirk stops him, letting Edith be hit by the truck and killed. And McCoy says, "Do you know what you just did?" And Spock says, "He knows, Doctor. He knows." Then they return to their own time, and the Guardian announces that time has resumed its proper shape. Then Uhura says that the Enterprise is now signaling them and asking them if they want to beam up. And Kirk says, "Let's just get the hell out of here." And they beam up, and I don't know why, but I really love this shot. I don't know why. So, directed by Joseph Pevney, and of course, written by Harlan Ellison, more or less, with Joan Collins as Edith Keeler. And yeah, this is one of the most beloved and admired and most well known Star Trek episodes. Definitely a grade A. I do give it a bit of a ding just because the whole thing, because the whole reason they go into the past is to stop McCoy because McCoy is done something and mucked around in the past to screw things up. And then when they get there, what does Kirk do? He gets into a love affair with this person in the past, and it's like, dude, what are you doing? You know this is a bad idea. In fact, I'm surprised Spock doesn't kind of reprimand him about that more. Okay, let me have another drink of water right quick. He says, "Winning anywhere, be Kirk." Yeah, Kirk's gonna Kirk, I guess, right? He's gonna Kirk will do as Kirk. He will do as he must to survive. Okay. Yeah. So Joseph Pevney was hired to direct, and of course, he had done some episodes before. He had more experience with feature films than any other Star Trek director, and in many ways, this episode was the closest thing to a feature film that Star Trek had made. Pevney said, essentially, City on the Edge of Forever was a motion picture. I've treated it as a movie. Joan Collins was the most renowned guest star to appear on Star Trek. She was 33 and had worked in TV and film since the early 50s. Collins was the female lead opposite Ray Milland in The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing. I've never heard of that one. She was billed above Richard Egan for the lead in Esther and the King and above Richard Burton in Sea Wife, and was top girl in Seven Thieves. I'm surprised her and Burton didn't wind up married. And then she also replaced Dorothy Lamour as the girl, starring alongside Bob Hope and Bing Crosby in the 1962 film The Road to Hong Kong. Joe DaGosta said, I think it was a bit of a surprise that Joan Collins was interested in doing Star Trek. She was a very notorious actress, but again, I think it was based on the allure of the show. There were two shows in town that everyone wanted to do, Mission Impossible and Star Trek. I say everyone, meaning within certain limits. We couldn't get, say, John Wayne. Well, actually, we did get John Wayne. He did an episode of Lucy, but Lucy was the one who made that happen. Joseph Pevney said, quote, Joan Collins was very good in it. She enjoyed working on that show, and Bill and Leonard were both very good to her. Using her was a good choice. John Harmon, who played Rodent, the milk thief, let me show him. Here he is. Uh, the milk thief who makes the mistake of stealing McCoy's phaser had made over 200 appearances in movie and TV from 1935 to 1983. He was 61 here and returned to Star Trek for a prominent role in A Piece of the Action. Hal Baylor, who plays the New York City policeman. Let me see. Oh, hold on. There we go. I think there he is. John Harmon, or no, sorry, Hal Baylor, the New York City policeman, was a character actor in films and TV with hundreds of roles under his belt. Before acting, he was a boxer and often brought that talent into his work before the camera. Baylor would return to Star Trek for an appearance in Elan of Troyes. Bart LaRue provided the voice of the Guardian. Let's go back. Uh, Not James Doohan, as some sources claim. LaRue was well liked in Star Trek. He returned to be seen as well as heard in Bread and Circuses and to provide more voiceovers in The Gamesters of Triskelion, Patterns of Force, and The Savage Curtain. David Ross, notable as a red shirted security officer in Miri, and I'm guessing I'm guessing that's him there next to McCoy. He appeared in Miri, The Return of the Archons, and A Taste of Armageddon. And John Winston, who played Lieutenant Kyle, is present for his third appearance in the series. I'd say I would have sworn that Kyle had more appearances on Star Trek than this, because it seems like he in my memory he was in a lot more episodes than just 3. It's probably because he was in Mirror Mirror, one of his more prominent parts, really, because he actually had some speaking role parts in that. And that was one of the real early episodes. So I guess I just imagine him being in more episodes than he was. Filming began at Desilu 40 Acres. Uh, this day, cast and crew assembled on the streets of Mayberry for the third time after Miri and Return of the Archons. Let's see. There we go. With everyone but the studio bean counters knowing that Pevney was not going to be able to get this show done on time and on schedule or on budget, and that no director could, the immediate problem was when to finish and where. Desilu 40 Acres was bustling with activity. Rango, a western show, needed the western street at 40 Acres, which was too close to the streets of Mayberry to allow both productions to film at once. Gomer Pyle also had 40 Acres booked for its outdoor Marine camp scenes, and Hogan's Heroes had a booking for the exterior of its POW camp. More of a problem in the coming week was that the Andy Griffith show would need to get back to shooting in the streets of Mayberry the following week. Pevney and company had to wait several days before returning and shooting the night scenes. On day 2, Monday, production moved to Desilu Gower Stage 11, which was the home of My Three Sons. With that series on hiatus and its sets in storage, Stage 11 was used for the interior of the mission set and the back room where McCoy is bedridden and cared for by Edith. DeForest Kelley shared, quote, "During the filming, I became convinced that McCoy should also fall for the lovely Edith. I felt it would add to the intrigue. Should McCoy as well as Kirk come under the spell of her decency, humanity, and beauty, both inner as well as outer? I suggested it to Joe Pevney. I thought a good spot to indicate the attraction would be when Edith comes to McCoy's room where he's recuperating. Pevney shot it. It was never seen." Yeah, well, from the sound of things, Pevney had his hands full. He was probably just like, man, I can't grant every little wish you actors have. Fontana recalled. Oh, hold on. RRTNZ says, "Did you hear about the extra who stole Shatner's hairpiece from his trailer after a day of filming Arena in 1966? Shatner was furious, but Nimoy simply said, 'Hair today, Gorn tomorrow.'" Wap, 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 wap. Okay. Have you been hanging out with Harvey Cthulhu? RTNZ? It sounds like a joke he would tell. Okay, now Fontana recalled Harlan in his scripts had talked about the city with rune stones tumbled in the foreground, and there was this time gate, which he didn't really describe much. Matt Jeffries, who had great sensibilities and was our set designer, was out sick with the flu that week. And Roland Brooks, who was the art department chair, took over to do it. He had a couple of martinis before dinner before he read the script and was confused about the description of rune stones. He grabbed a dictionary and got to ruin before he got to rune, so there's these pieces of broken columns and things like this lying around, which had nothing to do with what the script said. And of course, the time portal looked like this lopsided donut. And Matt Jeffries walked onto the set and said, "What the hell is this?" Pevney recalled, "Using hell in the last line was something of a problem." Okay, so let's go ahead and get to that because that's right at the end of the episode. Oh, okay. I need to. There we go. When Kirk says, "Let's just get the hell out of here." And RRTNZ says Matt Jeffries, inventor of the 80s expression totally tubular, often wrongly attributed to Mike Oldfield. I'm guessing that's a joke, right? I don't know who coined the phrase. Um, I mean, if you'd asked me, I would have guessed it was Moon Zappa who coined that phrase, but I don't really know, or at least who popularized it. Pevney recalled using hell in the last line was something of a problem. Kirk said, "Let's get the hell out of here," and there were objections from the network. Roddenberry had a meeting with them and said, "There is no other word which conveys the emotion of the moment." Of course, Bill Shatner fought for it too. We all wanted it because it sounded so great. Finally, NBC said, "What the hell, leave it in." Uh, okay. Taking 7.5 days to film, the $245,316 spent to produce City on the Edge of Forever made it the most costly episode of the original series, a staggering $60,316 over the per episode budget. This equates to 1.7 million in 2013, with an overage of 420,000. The first season deficit nearly doubled, reaching $134,823. I'm surprised that one's the most expensive one. I wouldn't have guessed that. If I had to guess, which one? I don't know. I might have thought, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I wouldn't have guessed this one, though. Joseph Pevney said, Roddenberry was very happy with the results of that. He wrote me a letter, which I'm very proud of. I still have it, congratulating me on my work and the extra special contributions he said I made to Star Trek. Now, this episode aired on April 1st, 1967. For the first half hour, it was second in the ratings behind Bewitched. And in the second half hour, it came in second in the ratings again behind the ABC show Love on a Rooftop. Okay, now now we're going to get into some of the stuff with Ellison and Roddenberry. So Ellison and Roddenberry continued to fight one another with every weapon at their disposal. Over the coming years, Roddenberry, feeling Ellison had broken the agreement to not speak in detail about the writing of the script, stepped forward and took credit for the version of the script that won a Hugo Award in 1968. When interviewed by this author, Ellison said, quote, Roddenberry gave me very little choice. Every time he got in public, someone would ask him something and he would make up a lie, or he would retell an older lie and embellish it. I threatened him once that I would bust his nose so hard his great grandmother would bleed. He was not in awe of me by any means at 5'5" and he having the brawn of a dock walloper. But he knew that I wasn't afraid of him and I wasn't afraid of anything that he could do. He knew he couldn't buy me and he wouldn't scare me. She never missed an opportunity to retell the lies and engorge them so that I'd look like a monster. I would go to a convention and draw in 5 to 10,000 people, and the fans, of course, not knowing any better, and he being the great bird of the galaxy, made it so I'd have to answer the same stupid questions about whether Gene Roddenberry saved my ass, and on and on and on. Roddenberry said 1 year before his death, quote, he, Ellison, turned in an episode which was a brilliant piece of work, and there had been no Star Trek pattern to follow. But by the time of this episode, we had laid down who our people were, who Scotty was and who the doc was, and so on. Harlan treated it as though I had assigned him to do just a science fiction episode, and I told him that wasn't satisfactory. So he fussed around with a rewrite, but he just never solved the basic problem of why are we doing this series? Who is Kirk? Who is Spock? So I rewrote it completely. Harlan never forgave us for rewriting him, said Robert Justman. And out of spite, he submitted his original script for the Writers Guild, and he ended up winning an award for the script that's never been actually produced. Star Trek had made a submission to the Writers Guild of America as well, the script for The Return of the Archons. Justman recalled, Kuhn, Roddenberry, and I were in attendance at the awards dinner, and as Ellison walked away from the podium with his award in one hand and his script in the other, he shook them at us, smirking as if to say, There, that'll show you. I looked at Gene, he looked at me and shrugged and said, Well, that's showbiz. So we just laughed it off. I mean, if the script hadn't been rewritten, the episode would never have been produced. Herb Solow was also present at that ceremony. He remembered Ellison's acceptance speech well. Quote, failing to mention Star Trek or even recognizing the two genes, uh, he quickly turned his attention to artistic integrity, said Solow. Harlan berated the studio suits and the executive producers and producers of television series for interfering with the writing process. The audience, which was dominated by writers, rose to their feet en masse and hailed this hero who had the guts to publicly speak out against them. In 2013, Ellison said, When I went to the awards, Gene Kuhn nearly choked on his dinner. He was sitting right down in front of me when I said what I said about the rewriting. Of course, nothing I've ever done in my 79 years has not in some way impaired my progress. Whether I was working for Aaron Spelling, Daryl Zanuck, or Gene Roddenberry, I'm not afraid of anything, and that is a great flaw. It doesn't mean that you're brave necessarily. It means that you don't know when to turn and run when the snakes are rattling. Mary Black recalled, after all the awards had been given out and the awards area was shut down and the people were just sort of milling about, Harlan climbed over the tables that were between his tables and ours, on top of the tables and over the table to come over and yell, we won to John. Quote, it really rankled me because he won the Writers Guild Prize, said Roddenberry. And I made a complaint about that. I pointed out that there were many excellent first draft scripts that could be submitted, but not fairly, because it doesn't follow the pattern of what you're guaranteed to write. And we had a huge fight, and Harlan was as near a thing as I've ever had as an enemy. He was a very proud writer, and the very fact that I had rewritten it really upset him. But it was obvious why I had to rewrite it. I had to put our people in. As for the version that Roddenberry, Kuhn, and Fontana wrote, based on Ellison's story and is directed by Joseph Pevney, winning the International Hugo Award as Best Science Fiction Presentation of 1967, it would be about 25 years before another episode of Star Trek would receive that honor. The Next Generation episode, The Inner Light. Roddenberry always acknowledged City as one of his top 10 favorite episodes from the original series. At the end of his life, for the last conversation, he picked it as his absolute favorite. DeForest Kelley also picked City as his favorite. Quote, I thought it was the best ensemble piece of work and that it captured a certain flavor and mood, he said. I thought it was one of the most dramatic endings and I've ever seen on a television show. Shatner went back and forth between this episode and The Devil in the Dark as his favorite. On one occasion in 1991, he said, City is my favorite of the original Star Trek because of the fact that it's a beautiful love story well told. Leonard Nimoy also picked City as one of his favorites. Dorothy Fontana named it as one of her two favorite episodes, aside from the ones that she wrote as the primary writer. The other was The Trouble with Tribbles. In 1994, Entertainment Weekly named City as the #1 Star Trek episode of all time. For its July 1st, a 1995 issue TV Guide ranked City on the Edge of Forever as number 68 for their list of 100 most memorable moments in TV history. The City on the Edge of Forever got the short story treatment by James Blish for the February 1968 publication of Star Trek II. And this is a book, it's not the movie Star Trek II. It's like a story compilation of episodes. Ellison sent Blish his version of the script in hopes that it would be adapted for the book instead of the Roddenberry Coon Fontana version. Blish, however, with all due apologies to Mr. Ellison, chose the latter as being a better candidate for his paperback. He did, however, work in some elements of the Ellison version. The Guardians of Forever returned in 1973 for Yesteryear, an episode of Star Trek the Animated Series written by D.C. Fontana. Yesterday's Sun, an original Star Trek novel by A.C. Crispin, featured The Guardian Forever, which was published in 1983. And The Guardian returned again in a novel based on the characters of Star Trek The Next Generation, the novel Imzadi by Peter David, which was published in 1993. The battle over the script for this episode was the subject of a book written by Harlan Ellison called The City on the Edge of Forever, the original teleplay that became the classic Star Trek episode. It too was published in 1993. And I guess maybe that's the book you were talking about, Gwagnar, that you mentioned earlier. Harlan Ellison said, quote, "I love Bob Justman. He was always kind to me, and he was in the true sense of the word, a gentleman." Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what it sounded like. And so was John Black, and so were most of the people there. They all treated the writers with respect, not like they were only day workers. But everyone walked around Gene like the whole room was made of eggshells. He was half loaded most of the time and fully loaded the rest of the time. Gene Roddenberry's son, Rod, interviewed for this book in 2012, said, quote, "Regardless of who is at fault here, I think that Harlan's mannerisms and personality in handling these things resulted in me having no respect for him at all. If he was a polite guy who said, you know what, Gene did this from my point of view. I disagree with it, but it was his show. But I think he's wrong and I won't forgive him for that. If he just had that sort of subtle tone about it, I could respect him. But the manner in which he has conducted himself and still does 45 years later is really disgusting to me." Dorothy Fontana said, quote, "For 30 years, I couldn't tell Harlan that I was one of the people who worked on that script. I was scared to death to tell him." Ellison said, "It was 20 years before I found out that Dorothy did a lot of the rewriting. It broke my heart because I love Dorothy, and she was afraid to tell me she did that with cause. Sometimes it's good to know when to be afraid." Joseph Pevney said, "It was a very honest episode, and DeForest Kelley was so good in it. It was a pleasure working with the actors. They realized their full potential in that one." Now, here's a name out of left field. Dr. Laura Schlesinger, talk show psychologist, author, and renowned Star Trek fan, said, "I remembered great moments like when Kirk goes back in time and has to let Edith die. I made my son watch City on the Edge of Forever one night. He had never watched Star Trek, and I said, 'Watch this one.' And when it was over, he looked at me and said, 'That's powerful. He loved her. How did he have the courage to make that choice? It made you think about things.'" DeForest Kelley said, quote, "I had a feeling about that show. I knew it was going to be a winner, and I'm proud to have been a part of it. It's one of the few times I wished that I had been playing Kirk's role." Gee, I wonder why. Jerry Finnerman said, "That was a wonderful show. I thought I lit it well. I thought I had her looking good. Joan Collins, that is. It was just good. It was a good script. It was good acting. Joan was wonderful, very professional, and we enjoyed that. I enjoyed working with her." Joan Collins in 1996 said, quote, "To this day, people still want to talk about that episode. Some remember me more for that than anything else I've done. I'm amazed at the enduring popularity of Star Trek and particularly of that episode. At the time, none of us would have predicted the longevity of the show. I couldn't be more pleased or more honored to be a part of Star Trek history." In another interview, Harlan Ellison said, quote, "I never loved that Star Trek. It's won awards and continues to be the most popular one. My response is, you should have seen the original." Yeah, yeah, Ellison's never, he never really had a change of heart about that afterward. I remember seeing, I think it's here on YouTube somewhere too, him appearing on, it might have been Tom Snyder. You know, he on Tom Snyder's show back in the 70s. It was definitely the 70s, judging from the wardrobe. But it was Ellison. They were talking about Star Trek and about and this was before the movie. I think this was more kind of like maybe 74, 75, somewhere around there. And they were just talking about Star Trek and about the phenomenon of it and how it had kept growing and growing. Because I just think society, particularly the showbiz world, was taking note of how Star Trek just continued to grow ever since its cancellation. And it had Ellison on it, and they had some of the cast. I know James Doohan was definitely there, and Koenig was definitely there. I don't think Shatner or Nimoy was there. I think it was those two, and then I think maybe DeForest Kelly was there, and maybe Uhura or Nichelle Nichols. I'm not sure, but I remember it because I remember Ellison was just really, really just sort of deride Star Trek, as being mindless drivel for the masses and just kind of trashing it in general. And with Joan Collins, the thing about her, because I mean, I've never really seen her in much of anything, or saw her in much of anything aside from Star Trek until the '80s, and the most of the stuff I remember her being like in the '70s and '80s, she did a lot of she did a lot of soap opera type stuff. She was in Dynasty, of course. She was in Dynasty in the '80s, and that was her big thing, where she was this kind of, I don't know, kind of bitchy femme fatale character. But even aside from that, she did a lot of TV movies. Particularly, there were ones that were based on what was that author's name? Jacqueline Suzanne. That's it. She was this woman who was real popular in the '70s and in the early '80s, and she wrote a lot of novels that I think were basically kind of these sleazy kind of soap opera type things with like lots of rich people like sleeping around and betraying each other and crap like that. And she did some of those, I think. She was really lovely in this though. Okay, so wow, I'm at almost an hour and 20 minutes here. This is a long one. So that'll do it for City on the Edge of Forever. And I did say I gave it a grade A, right? Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, definitely an A for this one. So next week, like I mentioned earlier, I will I'll take a look at the comic, which was published. In fact, I think I can bring that up. Let me get rid of this. Yeah, here we go. Can you see here? Yeah, okay. So this was published in 2014 by IDW. Harlan Ellison's The City on the Edge of Forever, the original teleplay. And it basically goes through the original, it's the original version of the teleplay, yeah. And I read it a while back, like I think back during the summer, and it was really interesting. And when I did, I thought, when I get to this episode, this is definitely what I'll want to do. So next week we'll go through this, and it's a mini series. I think it's 6 issues, right? Or maybe it's five issues. So next week I'll go through that, and then the week after that, I guess, will then be Operation Annihilate, which will be the final episode of the first season. And then the week after that, what I'll probably do will be like a season 1 in review type of thing. Uh, oh boy. Argentine says, what do Wharf Crusher and Troy have in common? Well, one's wharf, one's a dock, and the other's a marina. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, but yeah, so the week after that, which will be like 3 weeks from now, um, or wait, I may not do it that week because I may have drill that weekend. I think I may have drill. It's either a, is it third week? I don't know. We'll see. But the week after that, I plan to do kind of a season one in review where I'll go over my favorite episodes, and we'll also just kind of talk about the reaction and sort of the cultural phenomenon of Star Trek that was sort of taking off in the 60s at that time when the show was on the air. And then, of course, after that, then we'll start season two. And there's another one from RTNZ. What do Ferengi and Major Answer have in common? Both are obsessed with profits. Okay. Okay, so that'll be that. Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you to those who stopped by. Oh, please do like the stream before you leave, and please do sub to the channel if you haven't before. Um, let's see what. Oh, let me plug some of my videos. So, I did recently post my review of Nosferatu a few days ago. And also, I recently posted a video, top 5 underrated Superman villains on my channel. So I hope you'll check that out. And okay, here's another one. Sorry, what do Ferengi and Bajorans have in common? Stupid autocorrect. Oh, okay. Both are obsessed. Oh, okay. So both obsessed with profits. Okay, now I get it. Okay. Because, yeah, the Bajorans, the profits. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so that'll be it. Again, thank you to those who listen to the stream and those who will listen on a rewatch. And again, I hope you have a happy and safe New Year. Don't drive drunk. Please take care of yourselves. And hopefully, I'll see you next week. Good night, folks.